Experience the excitement of Hollywood's 100th birthday celebration with the city's honorary mayor. Then meet TV's favorite kid sis, actress Tina Yothers, on Take Two at noon Eastern on CNN.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
This is Day Watch on CNN for Monday, February 2nd. With Reid Collins in Washington, Marianne Loughlin and Bob Cain in Atlanta, and Lynn Brown in New York.
Good morning. Filipino voters came out in droves today, casting ballots for that proposed revision of the Philippine Constitution. The election commissioner, Ramon Felipe, estimates 85, perhaps 90% of the nation's voters actually went to the polls. The first electoral test for President Corazon Aquino.
The plebiscite has been very normal, very peaceful, very uneventful. I'm sorry to inform you that practically there's nothing untoward to report.
The early and unofficial returns indicate Mrs. Aquino is getting a more than 3-to-1 vote of approval for the new charter. The final tally won't be available for several days. There was violence during the voting. Several people were killed. The Stars and Stripes did it again, winning in a breeze for the third straight time against Australia's Kookaburra 3. This victory gives the American yacht the almost invincible lead in the best-of-7 America's Cup competition. No contender ever has come back from a 3-0 deficit in the 136-year history of the race. In this third contest, the Australian yacht took an early lead, but Stars and Stripes skipper Dennis Conner rallied the crew, and the American boat surged to a 1-minute 46-second win. The race was completed despite a crank bomb threat against Kookaburra. The Americans now have elected to take a rest day, a lay day, so the fourth final race comes tomorrow, what could be the final race. A foreign journalist is in Iran being detained without explanation. Wall Street Journal reporter Gerald Saib was one of nearly 100 journalists invited by the Iranian government to cover an offensive against Iraq. However, Saib was not allowed to leave over the weekend, and Iranian officials are not exactly saying why. An Islamic Republic news agency report monitored in Cyprus alleged that a spy for the Zionist regime of Israel had been detained in Iran after entering the country posing as a journalist and using a false passport. It's not clear if that report is a direct reference to Gerald Saib. With us now, live on the phone from Rome, is the Washington Post reporter Loren Jenkins, who was in Iran with Gerald Saib last week. Is there any possible reason you might have for the Iranians wanting to detain one journalist, Saib?
Not really. I think it's probably is a choice that was made for internal political reasons between some of the factions that are fighting for the succession of Khomeini in Iran itself. Certainly, Jerry Saib did nothing, wrote nothing more than any of the other 100 journalists there. It was his first trip to Iran, and there was nothing that the Iranians should have had against him.
You indicate there is a war of secession there. Is that evident to you? Is there really a moderate faction and an immoderate faction?
Well, you can't use terms like moderate because you're dealing with various degrees of extremism. There are no moderates in the Iranian government, but there are some who are, let's say, pragmatic extremists as opposed to those that are pure theological extremists.
Have you any clues at all as to where he might be held? When did you last see him? When did anybody you know last see him?
On Saturday, about 2 hours before he was picked up by Iranian secret policemen. At the time, he was being accompanied by a Swiss diplomat who had him under his tentative protection, since the Swiss handled U.S. affairs in Iran since the closure of our embassy there.
You say the Swiss had Saib under his protective custody, you think?
Well, they were with him, let's put it that way. Obviously, under diplomatic laws, non-diplomats are not covered by immunity. But he had gone to the Swiss to seek help in getting his passport back. A little while later, as he was leaving his hotel with this Swiss diplomat, policemen came up and arrested both of them. the Swiss diplomat was later released after about half an hour.
Mr. Jenkins, we're told that this number of journalists were suddenly admitted to Iran to cover the war. Did you cover the war, or did you cover Rafsanjani and the biblical lessons in Tehran itself?
Well, you cover everything. If you're a journalist and you go into a country, you don't let them tell you what to write about. You write everything that you see and hear. I think all journalists there covered the war and covered Rafsanjani and other political stories as well.
Did you find, just a final question, did you find animosity? What was the general tenor of the situation in Tehran toward you?
Well, among normal people you meet in the street, it's mixed. A lot of people are very courteous, and there's no animosity. Among certain segments of the government, such as the Ministry of Guidance, which accredits journalists, there was a lot of hostility, as the case was proven with Jerry's arrest.
Thank you. Loren Jenkins, correspondent for the Washington Post, who was among the panoply of reporters recently in Iran, and the story of what may or may not have happened to the Wall Street Journal's man, Gerald Seib. Marianne?
Now 6 minutes past the hour. There is no definite word today on the fate of hostage negotiator Terry Waite. The Church of England says it has no confirmation that Waite has been kidnapped. But United Press International quotes a top official of the Shiite Amal militia in Lebanon as saying Waite has been abducted. Waite disappeared almost 2 weeks ago after leaving his Beirut hotel. It is believed he was going to meet with the Islamic Jihad, the Muslim extremist group that claims to hold 2 U.S. citizens hostage. Islamic Jihad issued a new threat against the captives today. The group says it will kill the American hostages if the United States attacks Muslims in Lebanon or in the region. The typewritten threat was delivered to a Western news agency in Beirut, accompanied by a picture of hostage Terry Anderson. In addition to Anderson, the Islamic Jihad claims to hold American Thomas Sutherland.
The Pentagon reportedly knew about and condoned a major private effort to ship more than $1 billion in U.S. weapons to Iran. Today's edition of the New York Times reports the private arms deals under the umbrella code name the Demavand Project began in 1983. The newspaper reports the Pentagon claims it learned about the illegal arms sales effort in late 1985. But the Times quotes private arms dealers as saying some high-level U.S. officials knew about it as early as early 1984. The Times says its sources say the Pentagon allowed the deals to continue in hopes it would get intelligence information about Soviet weapons which Iran captured from Iraq. The White House says Congress does not need to see President Reagan's private notes. Those notes are usually written at night in the president's residence. They could contain information on U.S. arms sales to Iran, and a select Senate panel is considering whether to ask for them. Committee member George Mitchell of Maine says the panel should see anything that might shed light on the Iran-Contra affair. The White House apparently hasn't decided how it'll handle such a request, but spokesman Don Mathis says the notes are personal papers, not transcripts, and should not be shown to Congress. The Iran-Contra affair and the hostage situation in the Middle East are just two of the issues facing Congress this week. Correspondent Bob Franken in Washington takes a look at the week ahead on Capitol Hill.
Over Milwaukee. More sports is ahead later in the morning, but right now let's go back to Washington and Reid Collins.
Thank you, Dennis. Let's get more on the CIA situation and its directorship. Go to the White House, CNN senior White House correspondent Charles Biebauer. Charles.
Good morning, Reid. Well, it would have seemed inevitable once the seriousness of Mr. Casey's illness became apparent several weeks ago that at some point he had to resign. There was hesitancy on the part of the president in the first place to ask for that resignation, but it was tendered apparently now on Friday, we are told, when White House Chief of Staff Donald Regan and Attorney General Edwin Meese visited with Mr. Casey at Georgetown Hospital. Casey's resigning now leads to the nomination by the president of Robert Gates as the new director of Central Intelligence. Gates has been the acting director since Mr. Casey was hospitalized. Gates is, of course, subject to confirmation by Congress, and there will certainly be questions asked at that point about Gates's testimony in the whole Iran affair, which has been described as misleading in some contexts. Nevertheless, Marlin Fitzwater, the new White House press spokesman, says that the president's nomination of Gates was based on his total performance at the CIA. Gates has been there for some 20 years, and he will continue to act as the director of Central Intelligence until that confirmation process is finished. As I say, Casey's resignation offered on Friday to the White House Chief of Staff. No indication, at least at this point, that the president has even talked with Mr. Casey. That question raised at a briefing a few moments ago. Mr. Fitzwater unable to answer that. He did say that Casey's condition continues to improve steadily, that he is alert. The hospital, Georgetown Hospital here in Washington, describes his condition as stable. And the president has asked Casey to take up the role of counselor to the president when and if he is able to do so. Reid?
Thank you. That's Charles Biebauer reporting live from in front of the White House, the latest from the situation with regard to William Casey. There's been an exchange of letters in which Mr. Casey has, as we heard, resigned.
How can you profit in the months ahead? Should you buy stocks or bonds now or wait? What's the outlook for
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
This is Day Watch on CNN for Monday, February 2nd. With Reid Collins in Washington, Molly McCoy and Brian Nelson in Atlanta, and Lynn Brown in New York.
Good morning. The ailing CIA director, William Casey, has resigned, saying he recognizes the need for on-the-job leadership. As you may know, Casey's been hospitalized since before Christmas for brain cancer. The White House accepted Casey's resignation with deep regrets, said Casey will become a presidential counselor when he's well enough. CNN's Larry Lamont has more on Casey and his career.
William Casey was unable to erase doubts about his credibility and judgment during his service as CIA director. His image was steadily undermined by controversies, like the appointment of Reagan campaign aide Max Hugel to a high post in the CIA in early 1981. Hugel resigned in short order following allegations of shady stock market dealings, and some believed Casey should also quit.
I would hope that because there is a lot of controversy surrounding Mr. Casey, a number of serious allegations have been raised, that in the best interest of the country, in the best interest of the intelligence agency, he would voluntarily step down.
I feel that when all the facts are out, that it will be clear that I'm qualified and ready to continue to lead the intelligence community.
Casey was later accused by a House committee of receiving allegedly stolen copies of President Jimmy Carter's debate briefing book during the 1980 election campaign. Casey could say only that he didn't remember receiving the book. The biggest stink concerned Nicaragua. With the support of President Reagan, Casey helped direct a covert war against the government of Nicaragua. The secret wasn't kept. Harbors were mined. Contra rebels were given a CIA manual that appeared to encourage them to kidnap and murder political leaders. Casey said the manual was the work of low-level CIA staffers and was distributed without his knowledge.
Mr. Casey himself admitted to negligence in the management and control of this operation.
But the admission did not soften the suspicions about Casey's credibility. And that's one reason Congress outlawed U.S. aid to Contra rebels. During that ban, a cargo plane carrying arms and supplies to the Contras was shot down in Nicaragua. Eugene Hassan-Fuchs, the lone survivor, said he believed the mission was made possible by the CIA. It was later learned the U.S. had sold arms to Iran. Profits went into a Swiss bank account operated by the CIA, allegedly for use by the Contras. In appearances before Congress, Casey denied any knowledge. When the gruff New Yorker underwent Senate confirmation hearings back in 1981, many senators had high hopes. Casey had been very successful as a tax lawyer, a businessman, as head of the Securities and Exchange Commission in the Nixon administration, and in other government posts. He had even been an intelligence officer in World War II. Supporters say his experience helped boost morale at the CIA, get increased funding, and improve the agency's ability to assess intelligence data. Critics contend he failed to improve the agency's credibility.
Really, you've got an impression here of people who don't know exactly what they're doing.
Throughout his tumultuous career, Casey had the support of his friend, the man whose campaign he managed in 1980, Ronald Reagan. But questions about Casey's judgment and credibility appeared to outweigh his accomplishments. Larry Lamont, CNN, reporting.
The White House says it will nominate Robert Gates, the man who has been standing in for Casey, to become the permanent director of the CIA. Terror groups in Lebanon have repeated their threats to kill American hostages if the U.S. uses military force in the Middle East. Islamic Jihad, the holders of Americans Terry Anderson and Thomas Sutherland, issued a communique saying their response to U.S. force would be cruel and they would have no mercy. Meanwhile, reports that Terry Waite has gone from hostage negotiator to just plain hostage has led the Archbishop of Canterbury to appeal directly to Iran for aid in tracing that missing envoy. And one Lebanese group, the Amal Militia of Nabi Berries, says it will use its diplomatic pressure and other means to try to free Waite and the other kidnapped victims as well. But in Israel, Defense Minister Yitzhak Rabin had a stern rejection for the terrorist demands for the release of 400 Palestinian prisoners.
We cannot make Israel the international bank of terrorists that any terror organization anywhere will kidnap German, American, French, and the demand for their release will turn to us.
Another terrorist group has said it would kill the 4 teachers, 3 Americans among them, that they seized January 24th if Israel did not release the prisoners and do so by the end of the week. A Wall Street Journal report is being held against his will in Iran now. Gerald Saib had gone to Iran along with lots of other foreign reporters at the invitation of the Khomeini government. But he reportedly was detained over the weekend, and the Iranians aren't saying exactly why. State Department is demanding that Saib be released. An Islamic Republic news agency report monitored in Cyprus did allege that a Zionist spy who claimed to be a journalist had been detained, and this is apparently a reference to Saib. More than a year ago, some top Pentagon officials reportedly found out about arms dealers' efforts to ship illegally more than $1 billion worth of American weapons and jet fighters to Iran. Today's New York Times, citing classified documents, including some unnamed officials, says those efforts were not stopped, were allowed to continue on purpose because the Pentagon was hoping to get intelligence about Iran, as well as to gain access to a big super-secret Soviet tank that Iran had captured in its war with Iraq. The Pentagon spokesman Richard Schramm declines comment on this report. A Senate Intelligence Committee staff report to be released today would cast more light on the Iran's arms deal, at least in one corner of it. It will reportedly say that a Pentagon official was fired last April because the then National Security Council advisor John Poindexter was fearful that he might be stumbling onto the Iranian arms deals. This report says Michael Pillsbury was apparently very close to finding out about the deal. The report says Poindexter then arranged a lie detector test for Pillsbury and then fired him. There may be a showdown coming up between Congress and the President over Mr. Reagan's personal notes about the Iran-Contra affair. The Senate Select Panel on the affair may want to examine those handwritten notes, but the White House says no, notes are personal here. The White House Chief of Staff Donald Regan's reportedly dead set against release of them should the administration refuse to do so. At least one senator thinks Mr. Reagan may be able to claim executive privilege.
I don't think if he comes in and says that they're my personal diary, that affords any protection.
Yeah.
If he comes in and says that these notes were made in my capacity as president, then executive privilege may give him some form of protection.
Spokesman for the Senate Select Committee says it'll be up to its chairman, Dal Inouye, to decide whether to ask the president for those notes.
Iran says Iraqi jets bombed 11 cities yesterday, including one in which 68 schoolgirls were killed. That attack on Mianeh was 250 miles northwest of Tehran. Iran gave no casualty figures for the other airstrikes. Philippine officials say Filipinos turned out in droves today to vote for a new constitution. The official tally won't be ready for a week, but unofficial results show overwhelming approval, well beyond the 70% President Corazon Aquino had been hoping for. If ratified, that new constitution would limit the president to a 6-year term. The judicial branch will review all presidential decrees, and the president could no longer issue search and arrest warrants. Parliament would be replaced with a 2-chamber legislature, much like the U.S. Congress. And when the U.S. lease on Filipino military bases expires in 1991, the Constitution would require a new treaty be negotiated. Election officials estimate up to 90% of registered voters cast ballots. CNN's Brian Jenkins reports.
At many polling places around the Philippines, it seemed more a party than a plebiscite. The guest of honor was Corazon Aquino. She cast her ballot for the new Constitution at a schoolhouse on her family's sugar plantation about 70 miles north of Manila, and she didn't hesitate to say whether she expected her side to win. By what margin is the big question? A simple majority will do, but a two-thirds majority is considered necessary to dispel any charges of fraud or doubts about Aquino's popularity. The big voter turnout, as high as 90% by some estimates, is expected to help the pros more than the cons. When the closing bell rang at one of Manila's busiest polls, there was still a long line of voters waiting to cast their ballots. In some places, voters complained that their names had been left off registration lists. But for the most part, the process was peaceful and orderly. Government troops were on red alert to protect against attacks, but there were reports that it was military personnel themselves who were harassing voters in some spots to mark their ballots no. On the southern island of Mindanao, government troops met an estimated 400 communist rebels in a gun battle near Davao. And in another province, Muslim separatists were said to have stolen 50 ballot boxes. In Manila, 3 bombings on the eve of the election caused only slight damage and did not seem to discourage Aquino supporters from coming out to give their president a vote of confidence. A ballot for the new Constitution, after all, was a vote for Cory, and few voters bothered with details.
We haven't read the Constitution, not that much.
Even so, some leaders of the opposition promised to live with the new Constitution and the American-style government it prescribes, no matter how small the margin of approval.
We will have to bow to the will of the people for as long as the balloting, the counting, the tallying, and the reporting of the results were done in a clean manner.
With that kind of qualified support, it's clear the new Constitution, if approved, will not be a magic cure for what ails the Aquino administration. The president would still face troublesome challenges from the radical right and the extreme left, and her backers in the middle would be impatient to see their votes translated into real progress and prosperity. Brian Jenkins, CNN, Manila.
The Australian crew racing for the America's Cup kept on going today despite a bomb scare. In the last leg of the 8-leg race, the crew of the Kookaburra 3 was told an anonymous caller had claimed that a bomb was on board the boat. After the race and Kookaburra's loss, the yacht was searched and no bomb was found. Kookaburra lost to Stars and Stripes, the America entry. It was the 3rd straight win for the Americans. It leaves the crew just 1 victory away from bringing the America's Cup back to America. Dennis Dumler will have an update on that race in the next half hour.
On Capitol Hill, a house...
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
This is Daywatch on CNN for Monday, February 2nd. With Reid Collins in Washington, Marianne Loughlin and Bob Cain in Atlanta, and Lynn Brown in New York.
Good morning. Another change in the Reagan cabinet. William Casey, director of the Central Intelligence Agency, has resigned. The number 2 man at the agency, Robert Gates, would succeed him if the Senate approves. Joining us on the Day Watch now, live, is our senior White House correspondent, Charles Biebauer. Charles?
Reid, officials here at the White House say that Mr. Casey's resignation was his idea and that it was voluntary, and that it took place last Thursday. That's a correction from what officials had originally told us. Last Thursday, when Chief of Staff Donald Regan and Attorney General Edwin Meese met with Casey at Georgetown Hospital. The resignation was offered there. It must have been anticipated because Meese and Regan were prepared on the spot to offer Casey the position of counselor to the president. That's a loosely defined advisory position that Casey can take up once he recovers. According to White House spokesman Marlin Fitzwater, if and when the time comes, the job is there, without going into any further specification as to what Casey might do in that position as counselor. Casey's replacement had been long anticipated, but in the early days of his hospitalization, according to White House officials, the president did not want to do anything which might delay or deter in any sense Casey's recovery. There was no talk publicly about replacing him at the time. In fact, officials insisted that Casey could come back to the job. It was fairly apparent, though, that that was not going to be the case. And confidentially, officials here suggested that they would have to replace him at some time, and that has come now. Nevertheless, the hospital says that Casey's condition is stable. White House officials say he is alert and can talk, yet curiously, President Reagan, an old friend of Mr. Casey, has not called him at any point, according to officials here, since Casey was hospitalized in mid-December. The president has talked with Robert Gates, met with him on Friday. The position of Director of Central Intelligence was offered to Gates, who has been acting director since Casey's hospitalization. It is a position which requires Senate confirmation, and surely some in the Senate who felt that Gates misled them during earlier testimony will have some serious questions for him in that confirmation process. Charles Biebauer, CNN, reporting live from the White House.
Lebanon's Islamic Jihad today was threatening to kill its American hostages if the United States attacks Lebanon or Muslim elsewhere in the Middle East. A Syrian government newspaper charged the U.S. military is planning some military strike in response to the recent kidnappings, but the Pentagon repeatedly denies any such plans are afoot. The Jihad has claimed it holds the Americans Terry Anderson and Thomas Sutherland. It said any attack on Muslim interests in that region would mean death. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Robert Runcie, has appealed to the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament for help now in finding Terry Waite. Hashemi Rafsanjani offered last week to help trace the missing Anglican envoy. The Church of England will not say what, if any, response it's gotten from Rafsanjani. Waite hasn't been seen or heard from in Beirut now for 2 weeks. Today, the Shia Amal militia leader Nabi Berri, remember him, said Waite had been arrested by other Shia Muslims. And the leader of the Druze militia that was supposed to be ensuring Waite's safety, Walid Jumblat, said he is now terribly worried about Waite. Jumblat said he has had no response to his own offer to trade himself for Waite as a hostage. New York Times says top Pentagon officials did not stop illegal arms negotiations between private dealers and Iran in the hopes of gaining more information. This report says the intelligence community learned in 1985 of private efforts to sell Iran fighter planes, tanks, missiles, and attack helicopters. But the story goes the Pentagon reportedly allowed these illegal efforts to proceed because it wanted to find out more about Iran and Soviet weaponry. The Times says more than $1 billion worth of weapons was on the bargaining table at one point. Not clear, though, whether anything actually was shipped or sold. A Pentagon spokesman declines comment on this Times report. The Senate Select Committee that's probing the Iran-Contra affair is determining now whether it should ask for President Reagan's personal notes. Testimony by Donald Regan in December revealed the president does often write some personal notes on the day's activities before he retires for the evening. Now, some senators believe those notes might help clarify questions about the Iran-Contra affair. Well, there is no move afoot in the Capitol, as far as we know, to make Groundhog Day a federal holiday, so the wheels of government are spinning today. CNN's Bob Franken reports on Washington's busy week ahead.
Washington will once again focus on developments in the Mideast. The administration faces another turning point in the Beirut hostage situation, with the ultimatum that 3 Americans will be killed at week's end if captors' demands aren't met for the release of 400 Palestinians from Israeli jails. Amid charges that the Iran...
alcohol, and heart attack. Next on Take 2, right after the news. This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
Hello, I'm Ralph Wenge. Take 2 will be along in a few minutes. Right now, though, a look at our top news stories. CIA Director William Casey has resigned. The White House announced today that the agency's deputy director, Robert Gates, has been nominated to replace him. Casey is 73. He is still in the hospital, recovering from brain surgery in December. His resignation comes at a time when there are still many unanswered questions about his role in the Iran-Contra arms affair. Gates is a 20-year CIA veteran. He's been acting director ever since Casey went into the hospital. He first signed on with the spy agency as an intelligence analyst. His nomination still has to be approved by the Senate. Nearly 2 weeks have passed now since Anglican envoy Terry Waite dropped out of sight in Beirut to pursue his hostage negotiations. 2 Muslim militia leaders, Shiite Amal chief Nabi Berri and Druze militia head Walid Jumblat, now say they're afraid that Waite himself may be held captive. Meanwhile, ABC News quotes a source with ties to the Iranian embassy in Damascus as saying that Waite is a prisoner in the Baalbek area of eastern Lebanon. He reportedly is in the hands of members of Hezbollah, or Party of God, and also Iranian Revolutionary Guards. Prior to leaving Britain for Beirut, Terry Waite left instructions that there was to be no ransom payment or hostage exchange if he were kidnapped. His employer, the Archbishop of Canterbury, says he'll abide by those instructions despite his concern for his special envoy's safety. Over the weekend, the Archbishop was asked about a letter that Waite reportedly gave a journalist in Beirut just minutes before he dropped out of sight on January 20th.
I've heard of this letter, but I haven't seen it. It's along the lines of things that he has said to me several times. If it's a letter about having no part in supporting any money being paid or any exchanges being made for him, should anything happen to him.
The Church of England confirms the Archbishop has written to the Speaker of Iran's parliament asking that he intervene in Waite's behalf. There's no word on whether there's been any response to that appeal. Pentagon officials reportedly knew about private arms sales to Iran as early as 1983, but made no moves to stop them. We get more on this story now from Lynn Brown in the Northeast Bureau.
The New York Times reports that the Pentagon allowed private arms sales to Iran for at least a year in an effort to gain intelligence information. The newspaper says foreign banks financed the private sales of U.S. weapons to Iran. Reportedly included was a shipment of 39 U.S. jet fighters to help Iran in its war with Iraq. Arms sales to Iran were banned in 1979 after the takeover of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. The United States is calling on Iran to release a Wall Street Journal reporter who has been held there since Saturday. State Department officials say they are not aware of any charges filed against Gerald Saib, a Middle East reporter based in Cairo, Egypt. Iran's news agency reported Saturday that an Israeli spy disguised as a journalist had been arrested. It is unclear whether the report was referring to Saib. Saib was in Iran with other foreign journalists at the invitation of the Iranian government.
Iran claims about 70 school children were killed, 150 wounded in an Iraqi air raid on one of its cities. The Iranian news agency said today that Iraq's warplanes hit an elementary and a secondary school while classes were going on yesterday. The attack is the latest in a series of bombings on each other's cities in a war that has dragged on now for more than 6 years. Meanwhile, intense fighting continues around the southern Iraqi city of Basra. Yesterday, thousands of Iraqis celebrated what they called a major victory against Iran on the southern front. Unofficial returns show Filipinos are giving overwhelming approval to a new constitution that President Corazon Aquino lobbied hard for. Voters cast ballots in favor of the new charter by a more than 3-to-1 margin. The Constitution, a major test for Aquino's 11-month-old government, confirms her office for the next 6 years. The military was on full alert during the voting after last week's failed coup attempt, but there were relatively few incidents of violence reported in the election.
Surprise opening statements today in the final phase of the Baby M trial. The court-appointed lawyer for Baby M says she will recommend that a judge deny Mary Beth Whitehead's bid to keep her child. The Guardian says she will recommend that custody go to William and Elizabeth Stern, the couple who engaged Whitehead as a surrogate mother. The lawyer for the Sterns today listed 35 reasons why Whitehead should not get custody. Among them, he says Whitehead threatened to accuse Stern of sexually abusing her 10-year-old daughter. Ralph?
In Australia, Dennis Conner is dusting off a spot for the America's Cup now. The skipper of Stars and Stripes is just one victory away from recapturing the sailing trophy. The American boat won again today, taking a 3-0 lead over the Australian boat, Kookaburra 3. The racing resumes on Wednesday. Conner had asked for tomorrow off, hoping for stronger winds by the middle of the week. Stars and Stripes is favored in the heavier breezes, and that's what they're hoping for right now. Dave and Lois, it looks like they're going to come pretty close to taking it, if not take it all.
Kind of makes you wonder, Ralph, if Dennis Conner might have been sort of sandbagging it for a while, you know what I mean?
Yeah, just a little bit. But, you know, Australia's had a lot of problems, and even in the elements, the weather elements that Australia was supposed to do so well with, they haven't, like in the downwind legs where the wind is behind the boat. They couldn't even do it then.
All right, thanks.
Welcome to our Monday edition of Take Two. I'm Lois Hart.
And I'm Dave Walker. Just a few minutes here on the program today. Our personal finance correspondent, Paula Nelson, will take your phone call questions on getting rich. She's done it, and she's got advice on how to do it.